Chapter 1. The Hidden Rooftop at Midnight. Near midnight, the way up is quiet. The stairwell narrows as it rises, and each landing seems to leave a little more of the city behind. Below, the sleeping megacity continues in its own softened way. But up here, the sound has already begun to thin. What remains is gentler than noise. A distant transit hum smoothed by height and fog. A muted vibration under the night, like breath felt through walls. At the top, the final door opens without hurry. Cool mist waits on the other side, and the small rooftop shelter receives everything with patient calm. Fabric awnings are stretched between simple poles and low frames, their edges darkened by moisture, their surfaces lifting and settling in the wind with the slow ease of lungs. Planters line the narrow walks in quiet rows. Trellised herbs climb twine and slender supports. Leaves shine silver green where fog has gathered along their veins. The teakeeper steps out into this hidden place, as though returning to a room that has been listening. There is no need to do very much at first. The first task is only to arrive well. A hand rests on the door for a moment before easing it closed. The latch is guided softly into place. Then, the teakeeper stands beneath the awning and lets the rooftop speak in its small, midnight language. Canvas breathing overhead. Leaves shifting against one another. Droplets touching wood. The city far below glowing through fog in dim watercolor halos of rose, amber, and blue. From here, the towers are no longer sharp. Their lights rise through the mist as if painted onto damp paper. Each color blurred at the edges, each window gentled by distance. The skyline feels less like a wall of buildings and more like a wide, sleeping presence. Vast, yes, but hushed, companionable. It keeps its own watch while this smaller refuge keeps another. The teakeeper moves slowly along the sheltered path, one palm brushing the edge of a table to feel the fine layer of night moisture there. A folded cloth is lifted from a hook. With unhurried strokes, the table is dried. Not fully, not with the fuss of correction. Only enough to make a warm place ready within the cool air. The wood deepens in color where it is touched. A few beads of water gather at the cloth's edge and disappear into its weave. Nearby, ceramic vessels wait in their places. A kettle with a rounded shoulder, cups turned upside down on a tray, a small pot resting under the eave where the mist reaches but does not settle too heavily. None of them are used yet. It is enough, for now, to notice that they are here. Their pale surfaces hold the faintest sheen. They seem to belong to the fog as much as to the shelter. The teakeeper pauses beside the nearest planter. Mint leaves lean over the wooden rim, each one outlined with droplets. A finger touches the topmost sprig, and the plant gives back a cool fragrance at once, fresh and green, brightening the air without disturbing it. Beside it, lemon balm gathers the mist in softer folds. A climbing vine has found its way around a trellis cord and rests there, still except for the occasional small answer to the wind. Nothing asks to be hurried. Nothing has been neglected. The care here is of another kind, one made of noticing. So the teakeeper continues with these first small attentions. A cushion on the bench is lifted and turned to its drier side. A bamboo shade, rolled halfway down, is checked where the cord loops around its cleat. A lantern, unlit for now, is shifted a little closer to the center of the table, where its glass can stay clear of the dampest drift. Each movement is plain and quiet. Each one tells the shelter, in its own language, that someone is here. And because someone is here, the space changes. Not dramatically. Only in the subtle way a room settles when it is inhabited with kindness. The awning seems to hold its curve more warmly. The narrow garden walks feel less like passages and more like invitations. Even the fog, moving in and out around the railings, appears to linger gently rather than press in. At the edge of the rooftop, the metal railing gathers a bright line of droplets. The teakeeper walks there and rests a hand near, not quite on the cool bar. Beyond it, the city opens downward in softened layers. Elevated tracks glimmer and vanish. A distant sign glows pink through the haze, then dims as a thicker fold of mist passes between. Somewhere far below, a late train moves, its presence known only as a low ribbon of sound that rises and dissolves before it can become distinct. This widened view does not pull the shelter apart. It makes the shelter feel more complete. High above the sleeping streets, among canvas, wood, herbs, and damp ceramic, there is room for the whole night to be gentle. The vastness below remains at a respectful distance. Up here, the air is cool against the face, but the space itself is already beginning to gather warmth, simply by being tended. The teakeeper turns back from the railing and returns beneath the awning. A hand passes lightly over the table once more. The cloth is folded into a smaller square. The cups remain waiting. The kettle remains still. Leaves whisper along the trellis. Moisture purls on the planters and holds. Overhead, the fabric roof lifts and settles, lifts and settles. And in that slow rhythm, the hidden rooftop begins to feel less like a place discovered and more like a place that has quietly made room for you. A little refuge suspended in fog, keeping its soft midnight shape above the glowing city. Chapter 2. Lighting the warmer. The teakeeper remains there for a moment, letting the rooftop hold its shape around them. Fog rests along the awning's edge. Moisture gathers on the dark wood of the table and at the rims of the waiting cups. Beyond the railings, the city glows upward in softened colors, not bright enough to intrude, only enough to remind the night that it is cradling something vast below. Then, with the same quiet attention that opened the shelter, the teakeeper turns toward the small warmer. It waits beneath the awning on a low shelf, simple and familiar. a compact little vessel of clay and metal that seems almost asleep in the cool air. Nearby, the kettle sits with a faint sheen of mist on its rounded side. A folded cloth rests beside it, a tiny tin of fuel, a box of matches kept dry beneath the eaves. Nothing hurried, nothing misplaced. Each object has its own patient stillness. As if it has been listening too, the tea-keeper lifts the warmer with both hands and sets it at the center of the table. The wood gives a soft, dampened sound beneath it. Fingers pause at its rim, feeling the chill that the mist has left there. Cool clay, smooth and steady. The kind of coolness that does not resist warmth, only waits for it. A cloth is unfolded and drawn once around the warmer's top, once along its sides, gathering the fine beating of moisture. The movement is slow enough that even this small act begins to feel like part of the night's breathing. Wipe, turn, pause. A corner of the cloth follows the curve where the little flame will soon live. When the surface is dry, the warmer seems to come into clearer focus. No longer only a shape in fog, but a ready place. The tea-keeper opens the tin. Inside is the faint mineral scent of stored fuel, clean and quiet. A small piece is chosen and set into the warmer's center. The hands move with the ease of repetition, but not with haste. This is not a task to complete so much as a small invitation offered to warmth. The matchbox is lifted next. Its wood is slightly cool. Its edges have softened from use. For a breath, nothing happens. The tea-keeper simply stands there with the unstruck match in hand, listening. Canvas stirs overhead with a low, papery murmur. Leaves answer from the planters in tiny, shifting sounds. Mint and balm brushing one another in the breeze. Far below, a train or late transit line moves somewhere through the city, but its sound arrives thinned by distance and fog, more like a remembered hum than a machine in motion. The whole skyline seems to breathe through the mist, towers rising only as softened silhouettes, their neon washed into pale halos of amber, rose, and blue. Then the match is struck. The sound is gentle, brief, almost tucked into the surrounding hush. A small flare opens in the tea-keeper's hand, golden and close. For a moment, it brightens the knuckles, the rim of the warmer, the damp grain of the table. It is not a sharp light. Here, even flame seems to understand the softness of the place. The match is lowered. The fuel takes the flame with a quiet willingness. A tiny bloom of heat begins. It is modest at first, hardly more than a suggestion. But on a cool rooftop at midnight, even a suggestion of warmth has presence. The tea-keeper watches until the little flame steadies into itself. Then the match is shaken out and set aside. No rush follows. The warmth is allowed to gather in its own time, as fog gathers, as steam will gather later, as sleep gathers when it is not called too loudly. The kettle is lifted next. Its handle rests easily in the tea-keeper's hand. A thumb brushes the lid to make sure it sits properly. The kettle's side is still cool from the air, touched by mist, but no longer entirely cold. It has held some memory of the sheltered space beneath the awning. The tea-keeper sets it carefully above the warmer, where metal meets support with the faintest click. Then there is only the waiting, which is not really waiting at all. It is another kind of tending. The tea-keeper adjusts the kettle by a fraction, centering it over the small, hidden flame. The folded cloth is placed nearby. The tin is closed. The matches are returned beneath the eaves. A small tray is brought closer. A cup is nudged into line with another cup, porcelain pale against the dark table. The little pot is set where a hand will find it later without searching. The shelter begins, through these tiny placements, to gather itself around the coming tea. The air remains cool on the skin. It moves along the open edges of the rooftop in soft currents, slipping under the awning, passing over the table, touching the tea-keeper's sleeves. Yet now there is a counterpoint. Beneath the kettle, warmth rises in a narrow column, almost invisible, except for the way it changes the feeling of the space around it. Cool mist and small heat, fog and flame. The contrast is tender rather than dramatic, and because of that, it is deeply comforting. The tea-keeper rests both hands lightly on the table and leans into a pause. In that pause, the city widens again. Beyond the planters and the damp railing, the megacity lies far below, like a field of submerged stars. Windows glow through fog. Signage becomes watercolor. The edges of towers loosen and blend into the night. Nothing presses upward. Nothing asks to be followed. The world below is still awake in its own distant way, but from here, it seems softened into companionship, a low presence beneath the rooftop's quiet work. When the tea-keeper looks back to the kettle, a first faint change can be felt more than seen. The metal above the warmer is beginning to wake. Not hot yet, not even warm enough to call attention to itself, just shifting, gathering, preparing. And the shelter, with its damp wood, its herbs breathing in the dark, its canvas moving gently overhead, begins to take on a new center. One little source of warmth, held carefully in the mist, as the night settles more deeply around it. Chapter 3. Among the planters and trellised herbs. From that small center of warmth, the tea-keeper turns toward the narrow paths between the planters. The table remains beneath the awning, the little flame sheltered there, giving off a patient heat that does not hurry anything. Behind it, cups and kettle wait in their quiet arrangement. Ahead, the rooftop garden opens in slim passages of damp wood and stone, bordered by raised beds dark with moisture. The fog has touched everything. It lies along the leaves in tiny, clear beads, gathers at the edges of the trellis, and softens each line until the whole garden seems lightly sketched into the night. The teakeeper steps into it with the same untroubled care used for the warmer, one hand brushing the edge of a planter as if greeting an old companion. Mint grows thick near the first corner, its leaves full and cool, breathing up a clean sweetness whenever the hand passes over it. Lemon balm lifts beside it, softer in scent, faintly bright even in the dark. The stems lean and answer the rooftop wind with the smallest movements, a slow nodding, a quiet return. There is not much to do here, and that is part of the comfort. A stem is guided back toward its support. A leaf that has folded under the weight of water is eased free. Fingertips press lightly into the soil near the roots, not to change it, only to feel its condition. Dark, settled, holding the day's stored dampness. The teakeeper pauses after each small act, listening as though the plants themselves might continue the gesture in their own way. Above, the canvas awning breathes once, then settles. Beyond it, another strip of open sky is only fog, pale and depthless. The city below sends up its softened glow through that veil. Rose, amber, and a dim electric blue, until the undersides of the mist seem faintly colored from within. Nothing shines sharply. Towers become suggestions. Windows gather into watercolor haze. Even the distant transit hum arrives rounded at the edges, less like machinery than like a long exhale held low beneath the night. The teakeeper moves farther along the trellised herbs, where thin cords run upward to a simple frame. Climbing stems have found them and wrapped themselves there in patient spirals. Some leaves are broad and cool as silk. Others are narrow, silvered by moisture. The hand travels along the trellis, feeling where twine has loosened, where a tendril has reached beyond its line. A gentle adjustment is enough. One loop is lifted and settled back. A trailing stem is turned inward, so it rests against the support, instead of leaning into the walkway. The task is so light, it scarcely seems a task at all. For a while, there is only this: leaf, cord, fog, breath. Water gathers at the tips of the herbs and drops without sound into the soil below. The wood underfoot holds the memory of rain and mist, cool through the soles. Somewhere behind, under the awning, the kettle waits near its growing warmth. Ahead, the garden narrows again, becoming a green corridor suspended over the sleeping city. The teakeeper pauses at a planter box set close to the railing. Here, the wind reaches a little more freely. It stirs the upper leaves and combs through taller stems with a soft, papery whisper. Beyond them, the skyline opens wider. The nearest buildings are only dark shapes edged in diluted light. Farther away, the city spreads into layers of glow and shadow, as if seen through breathed-on glass. It does not feel far in a lonely way. It feels held at a tender distance, allowed to rest in its own quiet, while this small rooftop keeps watch above it. A hand rests on the cool railing for a moment. Moisture purls there too, gathering against the metal and shining faintly. Then the tea keeper returns to the herbs. Near the far end of the path, a shallow ceramic bowl sits beneath the trellis to catch runoff from the awning edge. A few leaves have drifted into it. The tea keeper lifts them out one by one and lays them on the soil nearby, where they look as though they have simply come home. The water left in the bowl is still, reflecting only a blur of canvas and fog. When the wind passes, the surface trembles and smooths again. There is mint here as well, younger and lower, its scent released with the slightest touch. The tea keeper gathers a few sprigs, not many, choosing those already full enough to spare. The stems are pinched cleanly between finger and thumb. Cool droplets cling to the leaves and dampen the skin. The fragrance rises at once, green, sweet, clear, and lingers in the air like a quiet brightness. The sprigs are held loosely while the rest of the planter is checked. Soil at the corners, a stem leaning outward, a small cluster of leaves turned to catch what little open air reaches them. Each receives a moment. Each is left a little more at ease. When the tea keeper straightens, the rooftop seems to breathe around that motion. Canvas overhead, leaves along the trellis, fog moving so slowly it can only be noticed by the way the colored glow below shifts from one softness to another. The warmer's heat is not felt directly from here, but its presence remains known. A small, steady heart beneath the awning. So the tea keeper begins the walk back through the narrow garden path, one hand carrying mint, the other trailing lightly over balm and wet leaves. The plants brush the knuckles in passing. Moisture cools the skin. The city hum drifts up and thins, and all around this hidden place, suspended high above the sleeping towers, life continues in the gentlest possible way. Rooted in boxes of dark earth, climbing quiet strings, drinking fog, answering wind. Chapter 4. Ceramic cups in the mist. By the time the tea keeper returns beneath the awning, the little shelter seems to have drawn itself closer around the table. Canvas breathes overhead in the rooftop wind, not flapping, only rising and settling with a slow, patient motion. The warmer still holds its small, steady heat. The kettle waits above it, faintly pearled with moisture, where cool mist has touched warm metal. On the wood beside it, the cups and lids rest in a neat, quiet row, each one wearing the thinnest veil of fog. The tea keeper sets the gathered mint down near the tray and pauses there for a moment, simply listening. Beyond the awning, leaves answer the wind with a soft brushing sound. Somewhere lower in the city, a train or late transit line passes in a long, muted thread, already half dissolved by distance and weather. Light rises from below the roofline in blurred colors: amber, rose, a dim electric blue, Yet by the time it reaches this hidden place, it has become gentle, almost color remembered rather than seen. Then the tea-keeper reaches for the cloth. It is folded small and dry from where it has been kept under the eaves. The cloth opens with an easy, familiar motion, and the first cup is lifted in one hand. The porcelain is cool, not cold enough to startle, only cool in the way stone can be cool after midnight fog has rested on it. A fine dampness shines over its surface, gathering most delicately at the rim. The cloth moves around the cup slowly, without haste, circling the lip, the curve of the bowl, the small foot beneath. Moisture disappears into the soft weave. The porcelain changes under the hand, from mist slick to clear and matte, then faintly warm where the tea-keeper's fingers have lingered. When the cup is set down again on the tray, it makes only the gentlest click, a sound so light it seems to settle into the wood rather than strike it. Another cup waits, then another. Each one is attended to in the same unhurried way, as though no object here is too small to deserve care. The lids are next, turned over one by one in the palm. Their undersides hold tiny beads of water, bright as if each had gathered a little piece of the rooftop fog for safekeeping. The tea-keeper dries them with delicate strokes, tracing the knob at the top, the thin edge, the inner ring where steam will later gather and cool. Nearby, the kettle gives off the faintest ribbon of warmth. Not yet steam in any visible fullness, only a suggestion of heat rising into damp air. The contrast is tender and immediate. Cool ceramic, warm metal, damp wood under the tray, and the drifting breath of the rooftop moving through it all. The tea-keeper wipes the tray last at first, then decides to begin again from one side. Not because anything has been missed, but because the motions themselves are calming. The tray is lacquered dark enough to reflect blurred lantern light and the softened glow from below the skyline. Moisture has settled along its edges and in a thin sheen across the center. The cloth passes over it in long, even strokes. A dry path appears, then deepens into a soft gleam. For a little while, this is enough. Cup lifted, dried, turned, set down. Lid lifted, dried, nested beside its cup. Tray wiped, cloth folded, opened again. The rhythm is small and complete. It asks nothing more than attention. Outside the awning, the fog shifts. It does not clear exactly. It loosens. Through the opening between planters and hanging fabric, the tea-keeper can see the nearest towers as softened vertical shadows, their windows scattered like low stars behind gauze. Far below, streets are only guessed at by moving bands of pale light. The city does not press upward. It simply glows from a distance, companionable and subdued, as though it too has grown drowsy. A droplet gathers along the bamboo support near the table and falls soundlessly to the boards. Another follows from the edge of the awning, darkening the wood in a small, round mark that soon blends into the rest of the damp grain. The tea-keeper notices these tiny changes with the same quiet regard given to the cups. One of the smaller porcelain cups is held a little longer than the others. It is thin-walled, pale, almost luminous in this low light. The tea-keeper's thumb rests near the rim, while the cloth moves around the outside. There is comfort in the shape of it, in the slight weight balanced in the hand, in the knowledge that in a little while, warmth will gather here and stay for a moment before passing gently into the air. The mint leaves wait nearby, darkened by moisture, their edges soft and fragrant. The scent reaches the table whenever the wind shifts inward beneath the awning. Lemon balm follows after, lighter and rounder, together with the warm metal note of the kettle and the faint, clean scent of wet canvas. They make the shelter feel close and inhabited, like a room made not of walls, but of careful noticing. When all the cups have been dried, the tea-keeper arranges them again, though they were already arranged well enough before. Two slightly nearer the kettle, one turned a fraction so its curve catches the dim light, lids resting lightly above them, the small pot drawn to the center of the tray. Nothing elaborate, only a settling of things into readiness. Then the cloth is folded once more and laid aside. For a moment, both hands rest on the table. The wood is still damp at the edges, where mist has crept in, but warmer near the center, where the little flame below the kettle has been patiently working. The tea-keeper stands within that meeting place of cool and warm, listening to canvas breathe, to leaves whisper against their ties, to the far, softened murmur of the sleeping city. The cups wait, clear now of fog, their surfaces dry and quiet, and around them, the mist continues to drift through the rooftop garden, touching railings, planters, herbs, and the outer edge of the awning. While under this small shelter, everything is made ready with such gentle care that even the porcelain seems at ease. Chapter 5. The First Steeping. The kettle has been waiting long enough to gather a little warmth of its own. Not a boil, not yet. Only that first inward readiness, as if the metal has been listening beside the flame and has begun, quietly, to answer. Beneath the awning, the tea-keeper stands with one hand resting near the handle, feeling the mild rise of heat through the damp, cooled air. The cups are dry now. The tray is dry. The small pot sits open and patient at the center of the table. Pale ceramic holding the last of the mist in a faint, cool sheen along its rim. For a few breaths, nothing is hurried. Canvas stirs overhead with a soft, hollow whisper. Somewhere beyond the shelter, leaves brush one another in the planters, and the trellised herbs answer the rooftop wind with the lightest tremor. Far below, the city continues in its own lowered voice. A long, softened hum of rails and distant movement, too blurred by fog to become distinct. its lights rise only as color through the mist. Amber, rose, a dim electric blue, spreading upward in watercolor halos that touch the underside of the clouds and fade there. The tea-keeper reaches for the tin of leaves. The lid opens with almost no sound. Inside, the dry leaves are curled and dark, mixed with a few paler fragments that hold a faint green-gold edge in the lantern glow. Their scent is quiet at first, close to the wood of the table and the coolness of the night. And then it opens a little more fully when the hand moves through them. Something toasted, something floral, something deep and resting, as if the leaves have kept their own small store of warmth folded inside. A small spoon is lifted. Measured leaves fall into the waiting pot with a hushed, papery touch. The movement is simple enough to disappear into, and because of that, it feels complete. One spoonful, then another, until the bottom of the pot is softly covered. The tea-keeper pauses with the spoon held above the opening, listening again. The warmer breathes its faint heat upward. A droplet slips from the awning's edge somewhere nearby and lands on wood with a sound so small it barely disturbs the hush. The city continues to glow through fog, distant and companionable, as though the whole skyline has been wrapped in damp silk. Then the kettle is lifted. Its handle is warm now, and the metal carries a gentle weight. A thin thread of steam has begun to gather at the spout, visible only when it drifts across the lantern light. The tea-keeper tilts the kettle over the pot, and the first pour begins. Water meets leaves with a low, rounded sound, softer than rain, fuller than a whisper. It fills the little vessel in a clear stream that catches the light and then disappears into the darkening tea. At once, warmth rises. Steam lifts from the mouth of the pot in a pale ribbon, and for a moment, it seems to hold its shape beneath the awning before the fog receives it and makes it part of itself. The tea-keeper sets the kettle back over the warmer. Now there is nothing to do but wait. And this waiting is not empty. It has texture. It has scent. It has the quiet company of small things becoming themselves. The lid is placed gently on the pot. One hand rests beside it on the table, near enough to feel the warmth gathering in the ceramic. The other smooths the folded cloth once, not because it needs it, only because the motion belongs here among the others. The fragrance begins to deepen. It moves slowly into the air, mingling with damp wood, with cool canvas, with the green brightness left on the fingers from mint brushed earlier among the planters. The tea is warmer and rounder than the herbs outside, yet it meets them easily. Toasted leaf and night moisture, soft floral shadow and fresh stem. The whole shelter seems to hold the blend for a little while, as if the awning itself is cupping the air. Beyond the table, the narrow garden paths glisten faintly. Moisture beads along the railing at the edge of the roof, each droplet catching some blurred fragment of the city below. The towers are mostly silhouettes now, their windows dimmed by distance and mist. What remains visible is less like architecture than weather made luminous. The teakeeper looks out for a few moments, not leaving the shelter, only letting the gaze widen past the cups and planters into that softened expanse. The megacity does not press upward here. It simply breathes below, vast and remote, its motion reduced to color and murmur. Under the awning, the pot continues to steep. A little more steam rises from the kettle. The warmer gives it steady, hidden glow. Leaves at the edge of the shelter shift and settle. The fabric overhead swells once with the wind and eases back again. A slow inhaling and release. In that rhythm, the teakeeper lifts the pot and tilts it slightly, feeling the changed weight, the fullness. The first cup is brought closer. Tea streams into porcelain in a thin, amber-brown arc, dark at the center, luminous at the edges where the lantern finds it. The cup receives it with a soft click of liquid against ceramic. A small cloud of steam rises immediately, finer than before, carrying the opened scent upward until it vanishes into the cool mist waiting just beyond the table. The cup is set down on the tray. For a moment, the teakeeper does not lift it. The warmth alone is enough to notice. It gathers in the sheltered air and rests against the skin of the hands, against the wrists, against the face when one leans near. The surface of the tea trembles once, and then becomes still, reflecting a blurred oval of light, the dark line of the awning above, and beyond that, if one looks long enough, the faint, diluted colors of the city through fog. The distant transit hum seems softer now, as though the steam has risen between this rooftop and the streets below, and gentled everything it passes through. Kettle, cup, leaves, wind, canvas and moisture and heat. The first steeping settles into the night so naturally that it feels less like a beginning than like something the shelter has been waiting to remember. And in the small warmth beneath the awning, with the herbs breathing quietly nearby, and the skyline glowing far below in muted rose and amber and blue, the tea opens further still. Chapter 6. Along the railing of fog. For a little while, nothing more is needed beneath the awning. The first tea has opened. Warmth rests in the cups and in the small clay body of the pot, and the kettle keeps its quiet place above the low flame. Steam rises only lightly now, a pale thread that drifts upward and disappears into the dim fabric overhead, as if it has remembered the fog outside and gone to join it. The teakeeper remains still long enough to listen. Canvas breathes. Leaves answer. Somewhere below, softened almost past recognition, a train passes through the sleeping city with a hum so distant it seems less like motion than memory. The sound thins into the mist. Nothing presses forward. The night is content to unfold at its own patient pace. Then, with one simple movement, The teakeeper lifts the tray. A cup, the small pot, and one hand resting for balance against the table. The tray is not heavy. Its lacquered surface is cool at the edges, where the air has touched it, and faintly warm beneath the cup, where the tea has been waiting. The folded cloth is drawn once across a bead of moisture that has gathered near the rim. Another quiet act of tending. Another small way of keeping the shelter composed. From beneath the awning, the path to the railing is narrow and familiar. Boards darkened by mist give back a muted sheen. Planters line the walk on either side, their leaves silvered with droplets, mint and lemon balm leaning softly into the passage as the wind moves through them. Trellised stems make delicate shifting shadows where lantern light reaches out and fades. The teakeeper passes slowly, careful, not because the way is uncertain, but because the night itself invites gentleness. You might feel the air change there, halfway between shelter and edge. The warmth from the cup remains close to the hands, while the rooftop coolness gathers more fully around the face and sleeves. Fog drifts low and patient across the open space, not thick enough to conceal, only enough to soften. It rounds every line. It lays a hush over railings, over rooftops beyond, over the many windows of the towers below, until each light becomes less a point than a bloom. At the railing, the teakeeper sets the tray down on a narrow ledge beneath the eaves of a smaller overhang. First, the cloth is unfolded. Then the cup is placed upon it. Then the pot beside it. These little placements are done with the same care as before, though here the city opens wide below. The railing itself is beaded with water. Droplets cling to the metal in long silver rows, gathering where the bars meet, trembling faintly when the wind passes. The teakeeper lays 2 fingers along the top rail and feels the coolness there, smooth and damp. One droplet slips, joins another, and trails downward without sound. In the lantern glow behind, and in the diffused color rising from the streets far below, the moisture catches pale amber, then rose, then a dim electric blue. The skyline is near enough to be seen, and far enough to be gentle. No tower insists on itself tonight. Their edges dissolve into fog. Their neon signs, bright in some other hour, have become watercolor halos suspended in the mist. The city does not glitter so much as breathe. Light gathers, loosens, gathers again. A cluster of windows glows softly in one direction. In another, a rooftop signal blurs into a small red pearl, and then fades behind a passing veil of fog. The avenues below are hidden, but their presence can be felt as a wide, low radiance under the clouded air. The teakeeper stands there without hurry, one hand around the cup. Heat moves through ceramic into the palm, slow and steady. The other hand rests lightly on the damp rail. Coolness and warmth meet there, not as opposites, but as companions. The rooftop wind slips through the herbs behind, through the cords of the awning, through the loose edge of a bamboo screen farther back near the shelter. Everything stirs just enough to be known. A sip is taken. The tea is softer now than when it was first poured. The leaves have settled into themselves. Warmth carries a faint bitterness, a green depth, and a little sweetness that seems to arrive only after the swallow, when the breath leaves the body more slowly than before. Steam touches the face and vanishes. The cup lowers again. The city continues its quiet glowing. From here, the shelter can be felt at the back, like a lantern of calm. The awning, the warmer, the waiting kettle, the dried cups, the dark table under canvas. None of it is far away. Even at the edge, there is no sense of leaving, only a widening. The hidden rooftop remains gathered around this pause, extending itself outward to include the rail, the fog, the softened towers, the immense sleeping spread of the city below. Distance does not disturb the intimacy. It makes the quiet larger. A few leaves from the nearest planter have leaned against the lower bars of the railing. The teakeeper reaches down and gently frees them, lifting a damp stem so it rests again among its companions. Moisture purls along the leaf edges and shines for a moment in the diffused light. The scent released is cool and clean, a brief thread of mint in the mist. Then stillness returns, fuller for the small movement. The cup waits in warm hands. Droplets gather and loosen along the rail. Far below, another muted transit murmur passes and fades into the same deep haze that holds the towers. Above, the fog shifts so lightly, it is almost not movement at all. And the whole city, softened into color and breath and distant glow, seems to rest there with the teakeeper for a while, quiet at the railing, held between cool mist and sheltered warmth. Chapter 7. Adjusting the awnings. After a while at the railing, the teakeeper turns back toward the shelter, carrying the cup and tray with the same steady care as before. The path of damp boards seems a little narrower now, not from any change in the wood itself, but because the wind has shifted. It comes differently across the roof, gentler in one place, more searching in another, slipping beneath the edge of canvas and through the hanging lengths of fabric so that they stir with a looser, cooler breath. Nothing is disturbed. Nothing asks to be hurried. The shelter only gives a small sign that it would like to be tucked more closely around its warmth. Under the awning, the warmer still glows low beneath the kettle. A thread of steam rises and vanishes into the mist-dark air. The cups wait on the tray, with their rims faintly silvered by moisture. Nearby, mint leaves tremble in their planter box, and the bamboo screen at the edge of the sitting space answers the wind with a soft, dry whisper. The teakeeper sets the tray down on the dark wooden table and pauses to listen. Canvas overhead lifts, settles, lifts again. A cord taps once against a pole, then falls still. Beyond the shelter, the city remains far below, blurred into pale amber and rose and dim electric blue. Each light widened by fog until it seems less like a signal and more like a bloom suspended in air. The transit hum drifts up in a softened line, too distant to name, already dissolving by the time it reaches the roof. The teakeeper reaches first for the nearest tie. It is only a simple strip of fabric looped around a support post, darkened by mist and cool to the touch. With slow fingers, the knot is loosened, the canvas edge drawn a little nearer, then tied again with a firmer, softer hold. The motion is small, almost companionable. The awning responds at once. Its next breath through the wind is quieter, less open, the fabric no longer billowing so broadly above the table. Another tie waits farther down. The teakeeper moves to it without sound, passing the hanging herbs and the edge of a planter where droplets gather at the tips of leaves. There is a faint scent of damp canvas here, mingled with mint, warm clay, and the clean mineral coolness of fog. The second knot is adjusted the same way, loosened, drawn in, retied. A fold of fabric settles into a neater line. The shelter seems to gather itself around the table, around the kettle, around the little pool of warmth held beneath the awning. For a moment, there is only stillness enough to notice the difference. The wind has not gone. It simply moves more softly now, guided rather than resisted. It travels along the canvas and slips out at the edges in a lower murmur. The teakeeper stands with one hand resting lightly on the post, feeling the mild vibration of fabric and cord, as if the whole shelter has a quiet pulse of its own. Near the outer side of the awning, a bamboo screen leans in its frame. Its narrow slats are beaded here and there with moisture, and when the air passes through them, they answer with a faint brushing sound, dry and delicate beneath the dampness all around. The teakeeper steps there next, lifting the screen just enough to ease its angle, then setting it down more securely in the groove that holds it. The change is modest, yet at once the corner behind it grows calmer. Leaves that had been fluttering now only nod. The hanging strip of cloth beside the screen no longer twists on itself. It sways, then settles into a slower motion, rising and falling like a steady breath. The teakeeper smooths the cloth once with the palm of a hand, following the cool, wet weight of it downward until the hem hangs straight. A drop of mist gathers at one fingertip. It is wiped gently on the folded cloth left near the tray. Then there is another small round of tending. A loose cord is wound once more around a hook. A corner of canvas is drawn so it shelters the warmer from the side. A narrow panel that faces the railing is lowered by only a hand's width, enough to soften the passage of air while leaving the fog-lit skyline still visible beyond. Through that opening, the city glows faintly, patient and far away, as though it too has drawn a blanket closer without fully closing its eyes. The teakeeper pauses again. This time, the pause is longer because the shelter has become so easy to listen to. The kettle gives a quiet interior murmur above the warmer. Steam drifts and disappears. Moisture slips from the awning edge in slow intervals, touching the boards below with sounds too soft to disturb the silence they enter. From the planters comes the green scent of bruised mint and balm, released only a little by the passing hand and the moving air. Everything feels more held. The table, with its cups and tray and folded cloth, seems to sit deeper inside its own circle of calm. The bamboo screen keeps its gentle watch. The fabric overhead no longer lifts in broad breaths, but in small, even ones. The herbs along the narrow walk rest against their trellises, with only the slightest answering motion. Even the fog appears to gather nearer, not as something cold or obscuring, but as a soft wall of quiet around the roof. The teakeeper walks once around the shelter to make sure each edge is easy and settled. A hand checks one last knot. Another smooths a wrinkle where canvas has folded against wood. At the entrance to the awning, a hanging panel is shifted just enough that it no longer brushes the frame. Its movement changes from a faint flutter to a slow, brushed sway. And when the teakeeper returns to the table, the whole rooftop seems to have lowered its voice. Below, the skyline remains a watercolor of distant towers and muted neon hidden in mist. Above, the awning breathes more quietly. Around the warmer, the air holds a little more heat. The shelter has not closed itself away from the night. It has only softened its edges, making room for the wind to pass without lingering too sharply, making room for warmth to remain where it is welcome. So the teakeeper stands there for another calm moment, one hand near the kettle, listening to canvas, leaves, bamboo, steam, and the far-off city all finding a gentler arrangement together, as if the midnight roof has been carefully tucked in and is now resting more deeply inside the fog. Chapter 8. A second cup, slower than the first. After that small round of adjustments, there is less to do, and this lessness settles over the shelter like another layer of fabric. The canvas above no longer lifts so far before easing back down. The bamboo screen keeps a softer edge on the wind. The herbs along the narrow path move only in light, thoughtful nods, as if they too have grown quieter. The teakeeper remains still for a moment beside the table, letting the new calm show itself. The warmer gives off its low, steady heat. The kettle holds a quiet breath of steam at its spout. Moisture purls along the dark wood, along the tray, along the rims of the cups that were dried earlier and have gathered the night's fine touch again. Nothing asks to be hurried. The rooftop seems content to continue in this smaller, closer rhythm. One cup from the first steeping still holds a little warmth. The tea keeper lifts it with both hands and drinks the last shallow sip. It is cooler now, gentler than before, with the faintest trace of bitterness resting beneath the softer leaf sweetness. The cup is set back down with hardly a sound. Then the small pot is drawn nearer, and the second cup begins. This time, the motions are even fewer. The lid is lifted. The leaves inside have already opened, dark and softened by the first infusion, no longer curled tightly, but relaxed into themselves. They carry a deeper scent now, rounder and more herbal in the warm, damp air. The tea keeper tilts the kettle and pours with a hand so steady that the stream seems almost suspended, a clear ribbon passing through lantern glow and into the waiting pot. Steam rises at once, pale and quiet, and drifts upward until it is impossible to tell where it ends and the fog beneath the awning begins. The lid returns. The kettle goes back to the warmer. And then there is only waiting. Though even waiting feels like too active a word for what happens here. The tea keeper rests one hand near the pot, not touching it yet, only feeling the warmth gather in the small space above the table. The other hand lies beside the folded cloth. Beyond the table, the planters hold their damp greenness in the dark. Mint leaves shine where the lantern finds them. Lemon balm leans against its trellis, silvered at the edges. A few droplets slip from one leaf to another, making movements too small to hear. Far below, the city remains present in its softened way. Through the edge of the awning, towers rise only as dim shapes and watercolor halos, pale amber, rose, and a washed electric blue blurred wide by the mist. The transit hum is there too, but it is thinned into something almost like memory, a long, even thread woven beneath the nearer sounds of canvas and leaf and kettle. When the steeping has had time enough, the tea keeper lifts the pot and pours into a single cup. The stream is slower than the first one was. The color that fills the cup is deeper, a little duskier, and the scent carries more of the herb's delicate bitterness. It is not sharp. It is the kind of bitterness that feels clean and restful, like cool air passing through a warm room, like the green underside of a leaf, like the quiet after rain has already gone. The cup is held in both hands. For a while, that is all. Warmth moves from ceramic into the tea keeper's palms, into the fingers, into the stillness of the wrists. The cup's outer surface remains smooth, with a faint softness from the damp air. Steam touches the face and disappears. The tea keeper sits on the low stool near the table, shoulders easy, posture unguarded, as though the body has remembered that nothing more is required tonight, except this simple holding. Along the awning's edge, fog gathers and loosens. It drifts in a pale seam where the canvas meets the open air, thickening for a few breaths, then thinning again, revealing a little more of the blurred skyline before veiling it once more. The pattern repeats without pattern, A railing beyond the planters catches a dim line of moisture and gives it back as a dull silver glow. Leaves stir, then rest. Somewhere in the shelter, a hanging sprig turns slightly on its string and becomes still again. The tea keeper drinks. The second infusion is quieter on the tongue. The first cup had brightness in it, a gentle awakening of leaf and heat. This one has settled lower. Its flavor spreads slowly, green and faintly bitter, then softens into something almost creamy in the lingering warmth. It asks very little attention. And because it asks so little, it is easy to remain with it completely. Another sip. Then a pause, long enough for the cup to warm the hands again. The shelter seems to breathe around these pauses. Canvas in, canvas out. Steam rising, then vanishing. Fog nearing, then drifting back. Even the city below appears to breathe in its own distant manner, its lights dimming and widening behind the mist. Its softened hum never absent, never insistent. High above it, the rooftop keeps its small circle of warmth. The low flame under the kettle, the dark table with its beads of moisture, the herbs resting in their planters, the bamboo screen, the lantern's mild glow. The tea keeper does not reach for anything else. No cloth is unfolded. No cord needs tying. No stem calls to be straightened. For now, the tending is simply this sitting, this drinking, this listening to the shelter remain itself. The second cup grows lighter by degrees. The air against the face stays cool. The hands stay warm. A bead of water forms at the awning's hem, lengthens, lets go, and is gone. And still, the rooftop holds. The cup rests for a moment against the tea keeper's lower lip before the next sip. Beyond it, the fog shifts once more along the edge of the shelter, and the distant lights below bloom wider, softer, as if the whole sleeping city has been brushed with water and left to blur gently into the night. Chapter 9. The Lantern in the Mist. The cup rests a little longer in the tea keeper's hands, gathering warmth between the palms before it is set down again. Nothing asks to be hurried. The second infusion lingers in the pot. The kettle keeps its quiet heat above the small flame, and the shelter around them seems to have settled into itself so completely that each object now belongs to the hour without effort. Lantern light lies low on the table. Moisture purls along the dark wood. The canvas overhead rises and falls with a softened breath. From here, the rooftop no longer feels like a place arranged for the night. It feels inhabited by calm. The tea keeper lifts the lantern by its small handle, not because the path cannot be found without it, but because the warm circle of light makes the boards and leaves gentler to look at. Its glow is modest, amber and steady, touching the nearest planter rims, the lacquered tray, the folded cloth left beside the cups. The kettle gives a faint thread of steam that disappears upward into the awning's dimness. Behind the bamboo screen, The city remains where it has always been, vast, sleepless in some faraway way, yet so blurred by fog that it seems less like a machine of towers and roads than a great, low constellation resting beneath the roofline. With the lantern in one hand, the teakeeper makes a slow round of the shelter. A cup is moved a finger's width farther from the table's edge. A lid is placed more neatly on its saucer. The cloth, damp now at one corner, is folded once more so the dry side faces outward. These are not tasks of correction. They are simply touches of acknowledgement, small assurances passed from hand to object, as if each thing is being noticed before the hour drifts deeper. At the nearest planter, mint leaves lean under beads of fog. The teakeeper brushes 2 fingertips lightly beneath them, lifting a stem that is bowed against the wood. The leaves answer with their cool green scent, clean and faintly sweet. Nearby, lemon balm lies quieter, its edges silvered with moisture. A trellised vine gives a small stir as the rooftop wind moves through, and the bamboo ties make the softest, dry whisper. The lantern glow catches droplets along the trellis wire until they resemble a string of dimmed glass. There is a pause there beside the herbs. The air beyond the awning is cooler. It slips in under the canvas and across the teakeeper's wrist, carrying the scent of wet leaves, damp cord, and distant rain that never quite arrives here. Far below, the softened transit hum passes through the fog in a long, even ribbon. It does not disturb the rooftop. It only reminds the shelter that the city is still breathing under all this mist. The teakeeper continues along the narrow walk between raised beds. The boards are dark with moisture, and the lantern's light rests on them in quiet patches. Small leaves shine, then dim as the light moves on. A ceramic watering bowl left upside down beneath the eaves wears a crescent of fog on its rim. A hanging bundle of drying herbs turns slightly, then becomes still again. Nothing needs changing. The round is not for finishing. It is for keeping company. At the railing, droplets gather in a bright line along the metal bar. The teakeeper sets the lantern on a post cap and lets its glow mingle with the city's distant colors. Below, towers and windows dissolve into pale amber, rose, and washed electric blue. Fog widens every point of light until the skyline seems painted in water, edges loosened, brightness softened into bloom. The railing is cool beneath the resting hand. Moisture beads against the skin, then warms there. For a little while, there is only looking. The city does not press upward. It stays where it is, far beneath the rooftop garden, companionable and blurred. Here, above it, the shelter feels almost afloat. Planters, canvas, kettle, cups, lantern, leaves. Each one held in the same gentle atmosphere, as though the mist has gathered them together and decided to keep them. The teakeeper stands without needing to think of the next motion. Wind passes through the railing and rises through the trellised herbs behind. Somewhere under the awning, the kettle gives a soft, nearly hidden sound as warmth shifts inside it. When the lantern is lifted again, the return path appears already familiar, though it was never lost. The tea keeper moves back among the planters, brushing a thumb over the damp rim of a ceramic pot, straightening a length of cord where it hangs from the awning frame, touching the bamboo screen just enough to feel its cool smoothness. The shelter answers in textures more than sounds. Canvas breathing, leaves answering, steam thinning, wood holding the day's last stored warmth far below its damp surface. At the table, the lantern is set down. Its glow rounds itself over the cups and the small pot, over the kettle's curved side, over the cloth and tray, and the faint reflective sheen left by mist. The tea keeper pours a little more hot water into the pot, only enough to wake the leaves once again. The stream is quiet. The steam that rises is quieter still, dissolving almost at once into the cool air beneath the awning. Then the cup is lifted. Warmth returns to the hands first, and then to the face as the cup nears. The tea is darker now, softer in its bitterness, with mint and leaf, and the faint mineral comfort of heated water carried through clay and porcelain. Beyond the rim, the lantern glows gently. The herbs near the table barely move. The city below remains a watercolor haze, patient and remote. The tea keeper sits. Nothing is finished. Nothing needs to be. The warmer keeps its low red heart. Moisture gathers again on the outer rail. A leaf releases one bead of fog into the soil below. Canvas rises, settles. Steam appears, vanishes, and the little shelter above the sleeping city holds its quiet shape in the mist, as if it has always been here, keeping watch in this small amber pool of warmth while the night grows softer around it. Chapter 10. When the rooftop grows even quieter. Nothing is finished. Nothing needs to be. The tea keeper remains where the lantern light thins into fog, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, the other near the warm curve of the kettle. The shelter has settled into itself. Canvas no longer answers the wind with any large motion. Only a soft, inward breath and an easier release. The bamboo screen gives a faint, woody murmur now and then. Somewhere among the planters, a leaf touches another leaf, and then is still again. The cup nearest the warmer is lifted once more, not because it must be emptied, only because warmth is there to be felt. Ceramic, no longer cool, meets the hands with a small, stored gentleness. The tea inside has deepened and quieted. Its surface holds a dim reflection of amber lantern light, broken only by the faintest tremor when the cup is turned. The tea keeper drinks slowly, with no need to notice where one sip ends and the next pause begins. Steam rises only a little now, it loosens into the mist almost at once, as if it recognizes the air around it and is glad to join it. Beyond the awning, the rooftop paths lie dark and damp, their boards silvered in places where fog has settled and not yet moved on. The narrow walks between raised beds are familiar enough now to seem less like paths than like soft lines of thought running through the herbs. Mint leaves bow under clear beads of moisture. Lemon balm catches the lantern glow at its edges. A trellised vine, nearly still, gives one small shiver when the wind slips through and then returns to rest. The teakeeper sets the cup down with a quiet porcelain touch and reaches for the folded cloth. There is no real task left waiting, only the kind that returns by itself in a place like this. A little moisture has gathered again along the tray. A pale ring rests near the cup's base. The cloth passes over the lacquered surface once, slowly, and the wood darkens, gleams, then dulls back into its soft sheen. A thumb dries the rim of the cup. A fingertip clears one bead of water from the kettle handle. These motions do not begin anything. They simply continue the night in the language it has chosen. For a while, the teakeeper stands without moving at all. The city below is present mostly as color and distance. Towers rise through fog and then disappear into it, their lights widened into watercolor halos of amber, rose, and a washed electric blue. No edge is sharp. No window asks to be counted. Far beneath the shelter, a line of transit passes somewhere out of sight, and its hum reaches the rooftop, so softened that it seems less like machinery than like a long exhale traveling through the sleeping streets. Even that fades quickly, absorbed by mist, by height, by the patient listening of leaves and canvas. The teakeeper steps away from the table at last and follows the short path toward the railing. Boards give a low, damp hush underfoot. The air beyond the awning is cooler, though not cold enough to trouble the warmth still held in the hands. Along the railing, droplets have gathered in a bright row, each one carrying a tiny, bent version of lantern light and skyline glow. The metal is wet and smooth. The teakeeper rests a hand there only briefly, enough to feel the coolness, enough to feel how the fog has made even the railing gentle. Out here, the rooftop seems to float. Planters, trellises, cords, and awning edges drift in and out of clarity as the mist thickens, loosens, and gathers again. The city is vast, but tonight it asks for nothing. It glows below like something half-remembered, companionable in its distance. The wind moves upward along the building and arrives already tired, already softened, with enough strength only to stir a hanging stem, to brush the teakeeper's sleeve, to pass on. After a time, the teakeeper turns back toward the shelter. The lantern remains low and steady beneath the awning, making a warm shape in the fog. The kettle still gives off a little heat. The cups wait in their small circle on the tray. The herbs hold their moisture. The bamboo screen keeps its quiet line between the table and the open air. Nothing has changed. And yet, everything has grown a little dimmer, a little more blended, as if the night has drawn a softer layer over each surface. Another small task offers itself. The teakeeper touches the edge of the awning where a bead of water has collected and lets it fall into the planter below. Straightens a tie that does not need much straightening. Brushes 2 damp leaves apart where they have come to rest against one another. Then stillness returns at once, complete and unbroken. The warmer keeps its low red heart beneath the kettle. The lantern glows. Canvas rises, settles. Somewhere in the herbs, water slips from one leaf to the next. The teakeeper sits again, or perhaps only leans, held easily within the shelter's familiar shape. The cup remains nearby. The cloth remains folded. Steam appears so faintly now that it is almost imagined. Beyond the bamboo screen, the skyline breathes in pale color. The transit hum has gone farther away. Fog gathers at the railing, at the planters, at the edge of the roof, and loosens again. And the little rooftop keeps on with its quiet work above the sleeping city. Warm kettle, damp leaves, softened light, breathing canvas, while the night grows even quieter and quieter still.